So we will take up Book 1, Canto 5. I don't know if you remember where you were. Mine is on page 95. I would like to start from the line, in her mysteries moves, divorced from the Maker's laws, she too as sovereignly creates her field. Got it? Yeah? Can you tell your page to Josefa? Yeah. So here we come to a new idea, that is a shift to the working of nature, and there's quite a description of how nature goes about her own creation, almost in competition with the creator, the Purusha. So we see in her mysteries moves, in nature's mysteries moves, divorced from the Maker's laws. Of course, the Maker here is, of course, the Creator. She is divorced because she doesn't necessarily follow the rules of the Creator, the laws that are made by the Maker. So her moods are divorced, separated from the Maker's laws. She too, as sovereignly creates her field, her will shaping the undetermined vasts. So now you see, that's what's the role of nature or Prakriti. Maybe I'll take up one more line, you'll get that. Making a finite of infinity. So this is the main work, role of nature. Making the infinite as a finite form, and that's what is in the previous line also. Her will shaping the undetermined vasts, the vasts of the consciousness, the vasts of the Creator, all that is undetermined, infinite. Nature formulates them or forms them into tiny forms, and they become finite. She too can make an order of her caprice, as if her rash superb wagered to outvie the veiled Creator's cosmic secrecies. You see, this is what I was telling. She too can make an order of her caprice. You see, of course, she doesn't go by the logic or by reason. She goes more by her caprices. But even in her caprice, there seems to be a semblance of an order. And in all her creations, she is competing to outvie, to surpass the veiled Creator's cosmic secrecies. The rapid footsteps of her fantasy, amid whose falls wonders like flowers rise, are surer than reason, defter than device, and swifter than imagination's wings. So her way of creation is not necessarily logical and what we said, following any rule, but they seem to be more of a fantasy. Fantasy amid whose falls wonders like flowers rise. You see, falls, of course, you understand the word, fall is a stumbling, you stumble somewhere. So in nature we see wonder suddenly, I'm sure this all of us have experienced, suddenly from a big rock we see a beautiful little yellow flower coming up, and we wonder how come there's a flower in this huge rock. So what seems to be the opposite? From a rock we see this thing, from some other place we see an insect coming out. So it's all a wonder, and so she creates these wonders, but which are surer than reason, defter than device, more skillful, more certain than all our intellectual devices and our reason, and swifter than imagination's wings. So you see, this is of course, when you observe nature, what Sri Aurobindo describes here are so very apt. In the sense, we do have this sense of wonder. I mean, we are surprised at what nature can do. I mean, those of you who watch if ever you watch the TV channel Nature, was that Nature? National Geographic. Yeah, I do watch National Geographic, and there we see these wonders of nature. I mean, the birds' behavior, the serpent, the animals. I mean, an extraordinary thing we see, even the flowers, how they, blossom. You have snow for so many months, and suddenly one day you see a beautiful green leaf coming out of this white. I mean, these are the wonders, they really capture so well in all that photography there. So we remember these lines when we see that. All she new fashions by the thought and word, compels all substance by her wand of mind. You see, this is again interesting. You see, the wand is that magician has that wand, he just swings that wand and you see something else happening. But nature's wand is the mind. So with this mind and with this thought and word, she creates new things. But now there is going to be a passage from here onwards till quite many lines, where we see very graphically the description of the function of mind. It's a very beautiful passage here. Now we open with this line, mind is a mediator divinity. It's a very, a line that stands out, very powerful. And it's a statement which tells us mind is a mediator. Mediator is always between two things. Of course, we can understand here is a mediator between, say, matter and spirit, is a mediator between the inconscient and the superconscient. It is, it's a mediator because it has the role of taking up the aspirations of life and presenting it to the divine, to the superconscient. And it also, in its moment of silence, which we will see being described later on, in moments of silence, it receives from the superconscient the guideline and passes it on to life. So it is a mediator, and even from the point of view of evolution, we see we have come to such a level, we are between the stage of the animal man and the superman. So mind is again in between. And there he would say, it is a mediator, but it's a mediator divinity. So this is a word that I was looking for, and I found that in the Life Divine in volume 18 here, SABCL, that's on page 117. Because I was trying to see how Sri Aurobindo connect this to the idea of the divine. Because the moment you say mind is a divine mediator, obviously we have to see if this, our common ordinary mind, is a mediator or there's something more. And here on page 170 of volume 18, the chapter is called Mind and Supermind. There is a long description, but I'll read out a couple of important sentences. It is only when the veil is rent and the divided mind overpowered, silent and passive to a supramental action, that mind itself gets back to the truth of things. There we find a luminous mentality, reflective, obedient and instrumental to the divine real idea. There we perceive what the world really is. We know in every way ourselves in others and as others, others as ourselves, and all as the universal and self-multiplied one. We lose the rigidly separate individual standpoint, which is the source of all limitation and error. And then down the line it says, and so we perceive that the mind was really a subordinate action and instrumentation of the truth consciousness, so long as it is not separated in self-experience from the enveloping master consciousness and does not try to set up house for itself, so long as it serves passively as an instrumentation and does not attempt to possess for its own benefit, mind fulfills luminously its function, which is in the truth to hold forms apart from each other by a phenomenal, a purely formal delimitation of their activity, behind which the governing universality of the being remains conscious and untouched. You see, the line that I wanted to bring to your notice was, and so we perceive that the mind was really a subordinate action and instrumentation of truth consciousness. So this is the word that explains what Sri Aurobindo is telling us here. There is a mediated divinity. So the mind has the origin in the supermind. So it has itself a divine source. It is connected with the supermind. But of course, the mind as it is today, it has all this question of its separation, instrumentation, etc. But what Sri Aurobindo is referring to here is the higher state of the mind, where it is connecting the supra-conscious and the inconscient. So that's the word where I found out there is a subordinate action and instrumentation of supermind. So it's not just, it is really in ignorance, in darkness, etc. It is the subordinate action of the real idea or of the supermind. So then we see that such a mind can be a mediator, and what can it do? Its powers can undo all nature's work. See, the word can is important. That means if the mind wants, it can undo all nature's work. You see, here Sri Aurobindo brings in the thought of what is more subtle has greater power on the lower levels which are less subtle or more gross. So in his theory, it is always there that the higher the consciousness, the higher the manifestation, it is subtler and the lower ones are grosser. So the higher has a power on the grosser works, so it can undo all nature's works. Mind can suspend or change earth's concrete law. See, because it is a higher power, a higher consciousness, more subtle, it can always overrule the physical law. Affranchised from earth habit's drowsy seal, the leaden grip of matter it can break. Indifferent to the angry stare of death, it can immortalize a moment's work. You see, this is a very beautiful sentence again. It can immortalize a moment's work. And it does not bother about the angry stare of death. Because after all, an idea doesn't have death. It's only the body that has the death. It's only the grosser elements that have death. But all the ideas that have come to us from the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Gita, the ideas survive. The person who has spoken them maybe is gone. But that's why it says, immortalize a moment's work. What Shakespeare or Kalidasa or Wordsworth, they received in a moment of flash a beautiful line, a beautiful thought. Those remain. The man goes, the death comes and takes away. So it can immortalize. What mind can capture, it can be an immortal idea. A simple fiat of its thinking force, the casual pressure of its slight assent, can liberate the energy dumb and pent within its chambers of mysterious trance. You see again the power of the mind, a simple fiat of its thinking force, of its willpower, What is that? A simple order from its willpower, the casual pressure of its slight ascent. If it can really raise itself a little bit from the clutches of the physical and the vital, what can it do? It can liberate the energy dumb and pent within its chambers. So not only can it liberate its own power, make idea immortal, but it can liberate the vital and the physical energies also. By an ascent of the mental consciousness, it has the power of liberating these lower things. And then it says, it makes the body sleep a puissant arm. Now that's an interesting thing, that when we are asleep, the body is asleep, the mind is quiet, but the mental consciousness itself can use this sleep as a puissant arm, as something very, very powerful instrument, because we enter into the dream world, or sometimes we receive instructions and indications from other spiritual people. In fact, this is what the mother used to tell us, that when you are asleep, I work best and most in your consciousness, because there is not this resistance of our physical mind, there is not the resistance of the vital, there is not the resistance of the physical. So she says, I work best when you are asleep. That's why in those days there used to be a lot of people writing to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo about what they have seen in their dreams, seen the Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And she says, yes, it's true, because I come to work in you, change your consciousness or help your problems while you are asleep. So that's what he's referring to. He is referring to that it can make the body sleep a puissant arm, hold still the breath, the beatings of the heart, while the unseen is found, the impossible done, communicates without means, the unspoken thought. Again, this question of hold still the breath, the beatings of the heart, is all but the meditation. So during meditation, we can get into this question of holding still the beating and the breath. That's the stage of trance. It's not just the meditation. In a normal meditation, we cannot hold still the breath and the beatings of the heart. But in the level of trance, it is said is possible. So it is in that level that it communicates without means the unspoken thought. It moves events by its bare, silent will, acts at a distance without hands or feet. See, this of course is easy to understand in a way, because that's what we see the mind doing. It doesn't need feet and the outer instrumentation. It can communicate with great power, with great force on the thought level. So it moves events by bare silent will, acts at a distance without hands or feet. Here I found an interesting reference to some other reading. There is all of you are aware of this book, Thoughts and Aphorisms. This aphorism number 275, it says, if the French Revolution took place, it was because a soul on the Indian snows dreamed of God as freedom, brotherhood and equality. You see, he's he's not trying to praise India, he's not trying to praise the Indian yogis, but this is what is said here, that acts at a distance without hands or feet and with a bare silent will, that somebody on the spiritual level has aspired for this equality, fraternity and liberty. Because as we know by now, that all these great intuitive thoughts are first received by a mind, and then they get transferred into action or get translated into action. So the French poet who gave us this mantra of equality, liberty and fraternity, he says, must have caught from a spiritual level where, as it says here, an Indian snows, a soul on the Indian snows dreamed of God. Of course, this is a way of putting that this is all that is spiritual comes out of the mental, from the mental to the realization on the political, social field, etc. So that's what is the power of the mind. It can really translate itself, transfer itself without any external means. Just today I was reading somewhere, maybe in our Savitri reading this morning, that this is what happens, and I immediately thought of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, who would just sit face to face, speak not a word, but communicate everything. They would transfer the messages, but apparently there was no lip movement or hand movement. They would communicate, because this is easy to understand that in silence one can communicate with the thought level itself. So we see it moves this giant ignorance, this dwarfish life. It can illumine with a prophet's sight, invoke the Bacchic rapture, the Furies' goad. In our body arouse the demon or the god, call in the omniscient and omnipotent, awake a forgotten almightiness within. You see, this is the same thing, that this mind or this higher mind can illumine in the dwarfish life, which is otherwise without any power, without any communicative power. But the mind can inspire and awaken in life and in mind. What can it awaken? A prophetic sight. That means suddenly we capture a truth from the intuitive level, and what we utter becomes something prophetic. So it's the mind that brings in the prophetic sight, or again, it can, you see, it has both the contradictory roles. Invoke the Bacchic rapture. You know, of course, the Bacchus was the god of rapture, of Dionysian delight, as it is said. So he can bring in that Bacchic rapture, the Furies' goad, or in our body arouse the demon or the god. It can arouse both the demoniac impulsions or the godly impulsions. It can arouse both in the same body and the same mind, or call in the omniscient and omnipotent. So he is giving us a beautiful description of the mind, and there we see, and the last line, awake a forgotten almightiness within. So this is the role of the mind. It can arouse demoniac impulsions, it can bring in the divine impulsions, aspirations, it can call down the omniscient and the omnipotent, it can arouse the psychic being, the soul, and then the Almighty within us. So this is the dual function of mind, and is very powerful agent. So ultimately, of course, as all of you know, Mother would connect even the diseases, etc., how much they are based on the mind. And then, of course, Mother goes a step further to say that, of course, the origin of all the diseases is a certain imbalance in our own being. Well, now we see the mind's role. In its own plane, a shining emperor, even in this rigid realm, mind can be king. The logic of its demigod idea in the leap of a transitional moment brings surprises of creation never achieved, even by matter's strange unconscious skill. So here we see, even in this rigid realm of life and matter, mind can be king. The logic of its demigod idea in the leap of a transitional moment brings surprises of creation never achieved. You see, never achieved by life and life and matter. Mind can bring in great moments of achievements, and as it says, even by matter's strange unconscious skill. Matter also brings us surprises, as is told us earlier, but mind can bring in greater moments, greater surprises, which are not even in the ken of the human thinking. Now this is again a line that stands out, the next line. All's miracle here and can by miracle change. Well, I think I read out to you, if you remember last time, a passage from the Mother where she explains what is a miracle. Of course, the essence of it was, as if I can remember, that there are many levels of consciousness, and then most of these things do exist on all different on some levels. But when a thing or an event or a possibility descends from one level to the lower one, we do not see the passage. The transmission from the higher to the lower level is so swift that the mind cannot understand. And there what we do not understand, we say it's a miracle. So otherwise, in fact, there is nothing as a miracle, because what has happened now in front of my eyes had a pre-existence on a different level, which my mind and my ordinary consciousness cannot perceive. But the consciousness of a yogi, for him there is no miracle, because he says, yes, this existed on that level, this existed on this level. I've seen it. Now the question is, it has come down to the physical material level. But for us, the common creatures, we don't see it on the different levels. Suddenly we say popping it out on the physical level. Most of you might have read that book of autobiography of a yogi, isn't it? There I remember the incident where a lot of sadhus, sannyasins, suddenly they come to some place or to some guru, and they say, we want to have food. And this guru had nothing to feed. But when they come, they said, no, we have come hungry. And it is very much there in ancient Indian social practice, that when a sannyasi comes to your house, you cannot refuse him food. Whatever you have to share. Even if you have one grain of rice, you have to share that. I mean, there are plenty of stories on that. But this was the custom. So when these sannyasis come asking for food, he has nothing, but still he has to provide. So at that time he invokes some power. And then this is all reality, and it's not a story, because this yogi, he sees it happening in front of his eyes. Suddenly these people are sitting on the floor, on the mat, and then they are waiting for the food to come. And then out of the blue, so-called, there were plates that came. I mean, there were gold plates. I mean, the gold plates, they crystallized in gold plates, and each one of them, it came in front of each person. Then similarly the food came, and what is called materialization. And of course they all had their food and all that. Once they depart, he does another siddhi, and all the gold plates are vanished. So this is a siddhi that Sai Baba uses. I mean, it's not something that you people have not heard. It is dematerialization and materialization. It's not a thing that is a miracle. It's a miracle to you and me, because just yesterday a lady came to Sakar, and she had met Sai Baba. And of course he did the same thing, he does like that, and then you have a ring in your hand, and then he gave her the ring. So that's a miracle. He says, how come there's a ring in his hand? But this is the process of materialization. And this was an incident that, if I remember rightly, MP Pandit or some other person had spoken about it to the mother. In fact, the person showed to the mother that this is the ring that I got from Sai Baba. And mother says it's a process of materialization, it's a common thing. So what they do, of course, is that ring or that Mangal Sutra, we call that Mangal Sutra. In India, ladies who get married, they have some emblem here. That's called for the marriage symbol, So he used to give a lot of this Mangal Sutras to the ladies and to the gents, rings, etc. But these, they pre-exist somewhere in his room and everywhere, or somewhere or the other. And he has to do the dematerialization. It's a process, it's a siddhi. And a siddhi that one can learn. It's not something, it's not a miracle, it's not something great divine grace. It's only a siddhi. So, mother says, yes, it is, I can see it's a materialized object. So what I want to tell you is, these are the miracles for you and me. But for him, it's not a miracle because he knows that from some other room he is only transferring that into his own hands. And we have this incident, of course, in this autobiography of a yogi. But of course, in the life of Mother Sri Aurobindo, although Mother could have done a lot of these miracles because she was a great occultist herself, I don't think she much encouraged. Because you see, by miracles one can attract public, one can attract people, get their devotion, but it changes nothing in the person. You just get the material object, you say, oh my God, he's a great guru, he's a great God, and all the things. But the consciousness doesn't change at all. So Mother Sri Aurobindo never applied this thing. Of course, when they wanted to help somebody through another process, not by bringing material objects and saying, now you take this and you'll be better. So those, like the Mother Sri Aurobindo, who were wanting to transform the human being, they did not take recourse to this material dematerialization projects, because they only bring in the admiration of the devotee, but nothing more than that. So here, it is in that context we see that there is nothing as miracle, but Sri Aurobindo says here, all's a miracle here and can by miracle change. Well, if you take the same meaning of can by miracle change, so what is that miracle? That miracle is the higher consciousness. You know, we have that line, all of us know, all can be done if the God touch is there. So what we need is the God touch, the higher consciousness. If that higher consciousness comes, things can change. And a change which seems to us miraculous, but it is possible. So, all's a miracle here and can by miracle change. This is that secret nature's edge of might. On the margin of great immaterial plains, in kingdoms of an untrammeled glory of force, where mind is master of the life and form, and soul fulfills its thoughts by its own power, she meditates upon mighty words and looks on the unseen links that join the parted spheres. Well, this is again, of course, extension of the same lines of the same thought. Where mind is master of the life and form, and soul fulfills its thoughts by its own power. You see, it is a little higher. Now Sri Aurobindo is taking us to the next level beyond the mind, where you see a level where the mind is the master of the life and form. Because at present, although mind has all these capacities, but it cannot and it does not really basically change our nature. Why? Although it has this potential, it cannot and does not, just because it is not in connection with the higher consciousness. As we have seen in Sri Aurobindo's quotation from the Life Divine, it is only when the mind can connect itself with a higher consciousness that it can do all these changes. But the mind as it is given to us now is, on the contrary, a subservient of life and matter. So although we may mentally think of many things that I can do this, I want to do that, ultimately we don't get to do things, because it's the life and the physical which pull the mind to itself. So, but here what we see, where mind is master of the life and form. So we have a stage where he's saying mind has acquired this mastery. Not only that, where soul fulfills its thoughts by its own power. She mediates upon mighty words and looks on the unseen links that join the parted spheres. Thence to the initiate who observes her laws, she brings the light of her mysterious realms. We are coming back to nature. She brings the light of her mysterious realms. Here where he stands, his feet on a prostrate world, His mind no more cast into matter's mold. Over their bounds in spurts of splendid strength, she carries their magician processes and the formulas of the stupendous speech, till heaven and hell become purveyors to earth, and the universe the slave of mortal will. A mediatrix with veiled and nameless gods, whose alien will touches our human life, imitating the world magician's ways. She invents for her self-bound free will its grooves, and feigns for magic's freaks a binding cause. All worlds she makes the partners of her deeds, accomplices of her mighty violence. Her daring leaps into the impossible. From every source she has taken her cunning means. She draws from the free love marriage of the plains elements for her creations through the force, a wonder weft of knowledge incalculable, a compendium of divine inventions feats. She has combined to make the unreal true, or liberate suppressed reality. In her unhedged Circean wonderland, pell-mell she shepherds her occult mightinesses, her mnemonics of the craft of the infinite, jets of the screen's subliminal caprice, tags of gramarye of inconscience, freedom of a sovereign truth without a law, thoughts that were born in the immortal's world, oracles that break out from behind the shrine, warnings from the demonic inner voice, and peeps and lightning leaps of prophecy, and intimations to the inner ear, abrupt interventions stark and absolute, and the superconscious unaccountable acts have woven her balanced web of miracles, and the weird technique of a tremendous art. Well, I think I would like to stop here. I'm not feeling too energetic today. We'll take it up in our next class. We'll have a little quiet meditation.